we've seen two carcasses like that, where there's actually a pile of hair in one spot and the carcass is somewhere else with the skin still on. So it's not like something is dragged and pulled. My name is Mike Land. I'm the founder of Tactical Bigfoot Research. I'm also the co-host of Where's My Sage, a Taste of the Universe podcast you can find on YouTube, Spotify, Spreaker, all your famous, podcasting locations. And looks like my camera's off just a tad here. So I got into this cryptid world, kind of off path and everybody else. I didn't have a sighting. I didn't stop by watching the PG film or some of the other stuff. I mean, I was acquainted with, the PG film from, the In Search of episodes back in the day, but not the traditional way. I had a friend that had mentioned that he was related kind of as a joke to the Bigfoot culture. And I started to do a little research. I was home out with some surgery and did a Google search and found a sighting close to me. And as I proceeded to send him that text message that it was true that he had some relatives in the area, found that location was only within a couple of miles of my house. So being out on surgery, I took some time, did some more searching, found, and this is the abbreviated version, found a Bigfoot conference in Chautauqua, New York, and went down there, and I was introduced to Steve Kulls. And the reason I ended up in Chautauqua is that I had talked to a person that was in the environmental law enforcement field, and they had mentioned something. We had talked about big cats, and he had mentioned something about some tracks that their agency had done some investigations on. So that was down in Chautauqua County, New York. Ended up down meeting Steve Kulls, the Squatch detective, and you've had Steve, I believe, before on the show, and was introduced to Steve through Ryan Reading from Western New York. And Steve asked me, a couple hours later to join his group through a Facebook message. I agreed to join him for an outing, went out for an investigation up in the Whitehall area of New York. Nothing happened. And I thought, hey, this is great. We went out to the woods. It was a beautiful area. I saw some beautiful country, but nothing big and hairy came jumping out of the woods. So kind of gave it some legitimacy. Then I following Steve to different events, talking to more folks in the military and law enforcement arenas that had sightings. And the rest is kind of history. Ended up at a couple of events, heard some screams in some places, and it piqued my interest. As a kid, I volunteered at the local zoo and wanted to be a vet, so got a chance to spend a lot of time at that zoo for quite a few years, year round, listening to the primates and other big cats, as well as working in their mini zoo. And I eventually went on to school for criminal justice and archaeology and anthropology. So the search for this illustrious cryptid has kind of put me on an interesting pattern where I can use some of my skill set from career and education. I also have a research partner that's a biologist, and through everything, I actually eventually was tied in with Amy Boo and her group with Project Zoo Book. So been doing this for a couple years now.
Well, that's an interesting group. I've also had Amy on the show. She's a fascinating lady, and I believe she's talked about the group that you're part of. So tell me, what have you discovered, and especially from the point of view of your education and your ability of specialized interest in that regard, what have you found in regards to Bigfoot?
So what have I found? I found not a lot of direct evidence. But what I have found are different techniques that folks can use in their research. I'm big into helping families and friends get out in the woods. And if they're going to go out and research the topic, what other items that they can use, without buying the $5,000 and $6,000 thermal cameras, or, up and beyond with some of the drones. Do I have thermals? Do I have drones? Yes. I've got a background in some search and rescue stuff, so I do use that stuff quite a bit. But how folks can use different items to help, one, talk to witnesses, and two, to do their documentation. So when they hand things over to scientists that are out there, to have a better documentation. So different things that I've done, I've worked on some UV hair collection projects where I've got together with some taxidermists to give me known animal samples, so we can look at those underneath digital microscopes. And sometimes I'll carry a digital microscope out in the field, like this guy here, that'll go out with me. And those samples, if we do come across somebody that mentions that they have a sample, we'll turn them over to friends like Darby Olcott at North Carolina State University. With talking to different witnesses across the country, I get folks that tell me all the time that they see something in a brown or a gray, and what's brown to you, what's gray to you might be different. What's gray for me or brown for me might be different. So I had a witness that is in the eastern part of New York State who had a sighting near the Adirondack Mountains. And he said, well, it was gray and it was brown. And I said, okay, what was gray and brown? Well, again, like I said, what's gray and brown? So I sent him to a local box store. And what I had him do was pick up some paint samples. So he was able to go to his local box store and pick up different paint samples in different colors. I could go to a similar branch of that box store, pick up those exact same paint samples and look at them and say, okay, what color brown or what color gray he's looking at is totally different than what I'm looking at. Or what I'm looking at now is exactly what I'm thinking. So I can say he picked this brown, and I can say, okay, it's this brown. From that, we've expanded to using the Pantone color charts. So working with some artists, Pantone colors are an industrial standard for colors. So again, this is a way somebody across the globe might have a urine sighting or a Mapinguari sighting and see something, or somebody in the Pacific Northwest might be talking to somebody in Florida and say, I saw this. But again, like I said, they can go to their local hardware store, and if they got a name brand paint sample or the Pantone chart, which my Pantones, I think, are in the other. I moved everything around for a demo the other day and forgot to put them back in here. Yep, I got it. So the Pantone chart, like I said, is an industrial color setup. So I probably need to turn my green screen off, but they can go through and pick the exact numbers, and these numbers actually coincide to some of the web numbers, and they can look and get an idea. So that's my kind of thing, is doing the research. This is a sheet I take with me if I'm out in the field and somebody says, well, I saw this while I was hiking and they got a particular color. These are Pantone colors as well. So it helps us get a better idea of somebody telling me I saw a gray or I saw a black or I saw a cinnamon. Well, when they see the Pantone or they see the paint charts, they may say it was X, Y, and Z color over the body, and they can show us those different color charts. So I've started to work on helping to document some of those colors besides it's a solid black or it's a solid brown. Doing some more research, like I said, part of our UV hair collection project is getting folks to join with us for known hair samples so we can take a look and build a database. But with the use of some UV light, we're looking at some hair because UV light reacts with different animals in different ways. We see marsupials in Australia will come up with it underneath a teal color. Here in the in North America, you'll see flying squirrels with a pink. They're now seeing cats with a certain yellow using UV light. So I'm trying to do a deep dive at looking at different known animal species to see if there's anything different, and kind of something we kind of bounced off Doug Hychak back in the day, but using cell phone cameras and such. We're not saying that X, Y, or Z animal is quote unquote Bigfoot, but we're just looking at some other hair. So it's been an expansion of how we're doing the collection. It's also a great way to get, like I said, friends, family that are out there in the woods, you can use the UV lights. So one of the flashlights I carry with me all the time, this one does a couple different, but UV at the end, it gives you that purple. It's the old black light. Looking at those different hairs or looking different mosses, it's a great experience. If you're down on a coastal range, you can see some of the different floral and fauna will pop up different underneath UV light. So finding different funguses, arachnids, shellfish, even sea anemones, if you're on the coastal stuff, will come up with a different color. So how we document that information.
So what have you found with the UV light on the hairs that you suspect are a Bigfoot hair?
So
what has
not
been the
myself.
discovery?
What we've seen through with Doug, and my apologies, I thought my bummy was off on that. It was a sample that Doug had. It actually popped with a pink coloration. And what's strange, it was your message just came through. But it basically, with the hair, doesn't have a medulla in the middle. So you end up with a pink flow through it. But it's not pink when we look at like the flying squirrel. When you hit the UV light on it, you can see it pink with the visual eye. With using a camera, the UV light, it gives a difference. Now, there are some other hairs that are kind of coming up with that. So that's why we're looking for known samples to see what we have. And if we do find those suspected hairs, like we said, we're passing those along to North Carolina State University for them to do more genetic testing. And again, I'm not saying one way or another what it is. I'm just trying to develop as much data to see what we have. We've also worked on some hair collection projects where we've used plastic tablecloths, like the cheek. There's a pink one that we've used in the past. We just cut strips. We use basically static electricity, tie it to our hikers. As long as they don't get near the water and they don't discharge the static electricity, you can actually pick hair from an area and take an environmental sample of hair. So that particular bag of hair is got porcupine quills and porcupine hair that were attached to the plastic.
So, so about how many samples have you collected so far that you've been able to study?
So I've got about 20 samples myself of known. I've just asked folks to take a look, and I've got the UV hair study that I'll pass along to folks. Helps families and, like I said, friends, your individual researcher, kind of look at how you collect your samples. So from using the yellow one should work here. Nope, not going to work. Hang on one second. I need to figure out, turn my green screen off there for a second here. Choose virtual background. I think this will stop my background. Let's go there. So the documentation of what you're putting in there, the sample size, the date, all the information. So I have put the study together to kind of help folks package things up. So using sterile tweezers and making sure you got a mask, and how we're collecting it. We're putting it into small, and using gloves. Make sure you got your plastic, your rubber gloves, your nylon gloves, make sure your hands are covered. And we're putting them into coin envelopes. So generally labeled the same way as these envelopes. And we generally split the sample in two. So you keep one from your area, and if you're sending it on to somebody, that data collection is what we're looking at. So having that information is a great way of collecting it. And so that's part of the UV hair collection project that we've been working on. And occasionally, I will get somebody, but generally, if I know somebody has hair samples right now, I'm passing them along to, or pointing them in the direction of Darby to let them test down there. Right now, it's a free study that the university is covering the cost on. So those folks that have been saying, hey, we've got hair samples for years, we can point them in that collection. I'm looking at putting more of a known sample collection so we can kind of compare stuff.
Well, I think that comparison is really important. So are there any results that have come from that yet?
No, they went live about 2 months ago. But again, you can go to their website or look up Darby's information, and he can get you all set up, or do a little better than I can on what they're using for their studies, their primers. He's got a great scientific team that's on board helping them out. So
Yeah. So have you actually been out in the field and done the research yourself? And, and what have you discovered?
so I've been out throughout New York State, up into Massachusetts, down into Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, so out to Ohio. I'm out there taking recordings, running thermal cameras, just collecting as much data as we can. I also run a bunch of apps, run things like the Merlin birding app from Cornell University. So the sounds that are out there, again, most of the time I'm out there debunking more stuff than saying this is X, Y, and Z. But like I said, with Merlin, if you're getting out there and you're hearing the whoops and the howls and stuff like that, it could be a barred owl, but you could get something that's similar to like a gibbon. Again, it's documentation of stuff. For those folks that have gone out and found prints or tracks, we'll take a 3D scan. We use a 3D scanning app on the phone or tablet, because it's a little cheaper. You can get those as free apps or really cheap, for a year subscription, instead of buying, a couple $100, a couple $1,000 3D scanner that you need to take a laptop and other big equipment with. But from your phone, you can run a lot of that stuff right from your phone, and we can get a nice 3D scan. So if we find a print or we find a location that has some evidence, hair, such, we can take those 3D scans of the area as well as a 3D scan of the print. So not only carrying the big heavy hydrocal or casting material, but using a 3D scanner. And sometimes it's nice to use the 3D scan because using what's basic is photopictometry, and you're building that model of the print or the area, so you can go back and look at those things later on. And I like to move a little lighter in the woods, so I don't always carry a casting material. I generally can't carry that printer or that 3D scanner with me that's built into the phone.
So can you give us the information on the app for that?
So depending on your phone, there's a couple of different ones. I'm using a couple of different scans right now. So Scan 3D is one I've used in the past. Currently, I'm running Polycam, and the Polycam, I'm trying to see if I got one here that I can kind of just some different tracks we got here. So I don't know if we're going to work here. So it'll give you a nice 3D scan of how we can go. We can bring it in at different angles, and you can actually print some of those out. So that's Polycam. There's quite a few folks that works for Android, and it works for an Apple phone. Scan 3D is another one that I've used in the past. And we've gone through and we've even scanned some older cast tracks, some that Paul Bartholomew had, that we can go through and we can really look at that definition on both sides of the track. It will work with different items, and then I can even use a 360 scanning application. And again, like I said, they change on a daily basis with the changes in technology on the phone. So my phone's 2 years old, so some of those applications are different. With the Apple products, they've got built-in LiDAR, so it's got a different scanner as well as the camera systems. So again, like I said, each camera or each phone is going to have a little bit of different application that's going to work for it the best.
So are you able to take that 3D scan then and actually create a model and print it out?
You can, yes. You can pull it up on your some of the 3D apps on your computer. And if you have somebody that has a 3D printer, yes, you can put it in a 3D print file, and if you have a big enough deck to print it out.
Wow. Well, that does save a lot of effort and time.
Right. And again, you're out with your friends or something like that. It's a great way to take a look at things. Um, we see, and it's a big thing I kind of preach on quite a bit is, when we get folks that find a print, you may the definition with using a scanner, just the picture, you may not get that full definition unless you're trained to take forensic photographs, or just looking at things. And again, you can teach yourself. You don't have to always jump on all the classes and stuff, but having a good measurement tool. So a lot of times I'll run with a cloth tape. The reason I run with a cloth tape, it's a little different, but just so I'll finish the thing on the scan, is that having that known measuring device, not just your foot next to things, is a big thing. I run with the cloth tapes, and actually I'll put a ring on the end of them, and this twofold, I can put this through. So if there's a branch or a tree or something like that, or even if I'm carrying a tent stake, I can put it around the tent stake. And again, background search and rescue is that I can do a circle search at a known distance. So when somebody says we lost a track somewhere, there's a lot of times we'll stick an evidence marker down, and it'll either be a big evidence marker, or these are ones you can build, like I said, with the family or the kids or something like that. It's popsicle sticks and some colored duct tape, or craft tape or something like that, which works great for marking your trails. But I find that print, I do a circle search, and either I do it with the tape, or I'll even run, this is a short version just because it's easier for demo, the good old fashioned paracord. I'll take a known 10, 15-foot piece of paracord and put another clip or something like that on the end, again, so I can get it a loop around a tree, or again, the thing, and I can do a circle search. And when I find something, I'll put that flag back down. And if I find another print or something else of evidentially idea that something that's cool to take a look at, we'll take that photopictometry, we'll take that 3D scan. But from those points, I can also use either a 360 scanning or one of the room scanning apps. And it's something we can go back and look at back at the, at home, where it's nice and warm, you're not underneath the rain or whatever. But you can see where those prints or that tree break or whatever is, or where the hair was collected, and refresh your memory of that information. So it gives you a way of replaying things in a 3D perception. Sometimes you might not get with the video or something.
Yeah, and it allows you to diagram it so that it's more of a permanent documentation.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
like what was the most interesting area that you researched?
I like the Whitehall, New York area. Spent a lot of time. It's the area that really kind of got me hooked when I was homesick, watching the information on the Beast of Whitehall, talking to those law enforcement folks that were up in there. It's been a great area to keep going back to. I'm also a member of NESRA, and those guys have been around since the old Bigfoot forums. They were featured, some of the original guys were featured on the original Monster Quest from New York, but the way they investigate and document really, brought me back and keeps bringing me back to that area. Seen some interesting stuff in Florida. The first set of streams that I can't really tell you what they were or what they weren't were in Pennsylvania and the Chestnut Ridge. So there's been a lot of cool places, and we found some nest stuff down in Chautauqua County that we can't figure out exactly what was nesting in there. Again, it was at the beginning of me getting into the research. What we found is a bunch of magnolia seed pods, and we couldn't really find any magnolia trees on the particular property, but we got a hold of a botanist to talk about the magnolia seed pods. And this particular type of seed pod has some characteristics similar to citronella. So it has kind of that repellent, but yet this whole area looked like a little nesting area, and it was loaded with these seed pods, and we couldn't find any of the seed pods on the property. So something was bringing those pods onto this particular piece of property. So again, it's stuff you put in a journal. you keep it documented, you go back and does it happen again? In Florida, we've seen some deer that were killed, and there was a lot of pig sign, but there was no pig sign or any scavengers working on the deer. It was pretty much left, except for one little quadrant was kind of pulled off to the side, like the jaw had been kind of torn off. So could be coyote still pulling off, but we didn't find any chew marks on it. Nothing had gone and gnawed, not even any rodents. What we found strange is that a lot of the hair was pulled off, and I'm trying to think, there are a couple of animals that will do that. But trying to find that documentation again, it came kind of third person. But we've seen two carcasses like that, where there's actually a pile of hair in one spot and the carcass is somewhere else with the skin still on. So it's not like something is dragged and pulled. So it's just, again, stuff to document as you're going on this journey is really what's become kind of interesting as we go along.
Just some interesting observations. Huh?
Yeah. And that's what it is. The journey of what you learn, what you have to train yourself on, gets more and more interesting as we go along. I mean, when you look at things, everybody wants to just go out in the woods, and I know I have a lot of props here, but it's. I mean, I didn't go to school for botany or anything like that, but having a little guide, reference guides, and knowing what trees and wildflowers and plants are in there are so important, because that was a big thing when talking to the witness, in New York, when we started to do the color thing, was that, hey, where were you? Well, he was on this section of road. Well, what is the vegetation in that area? And talking about what trees were there. Well, when we looked at sending them back to look at the bark on those trees, those were those silvers, those browns, and those grays that this gentleman talked about. And we could really kind of pinpoint that, hey, what I saw was this. And if I took our paint samples and put them, well, that's kind of why it looked, in a certain way. So again, putting that documentation is so important. And even learning, animal tracks and stuff that you have to teach yourself, to get out there. I mean, how many people before they go run out in the woods train themselves on first aid and other things? And again, first aid kits are another great thing to find all your stuff that you need to collect your samples. You got your gloves, you got toothpicks in there, you got tape to make your evidence markers, you got tweezers to pull the splinters out of your hand. So a lot of that stuff is already, we're already carrying it with us. So building an expensive kit, like I said, doesn't have to be a crazy expensive kit.
What would you say is the most interesting thing you have found out about Bigfoot himself?
Well, I'm not going to say directly what, Bigfoot per se. I mean, it's the journey and the experiences of what I've talked to folks, more and more, what a lot of folks that I've talked to, some that have taken me to their sighting locations, what they saw was more a human creature than a big gorilla or chimp or something like that. They're really looking at that, the deep dive into some of the cultural stuff, and even some things that I found in the local area going back to the late 1800s, and some of the newspaper articles, the pre-internet stuff. It's kind of interesting, wondering what folks were seeing in those areas. Kind of really wants to take a bigger deep dive into the cultural aspects of things.
Well, there's a lot of Native American thoughts on Bigfoot. Have you studied any of that?
We're getting into that currently. Getting out to some of the local museums, and that's kind of our winter project this year. COVID kind of, and I don't want to say that word again because that I'm sure it'll tag your video. But being able to get into some of the museums, some of the libraries to do some of that research where you get your hands on some of the microfiche. Yes, microfiche, that stuff that nobody looks at anymore. That data's on there. Talking to the folks, and I've got one partner that I've had go out and talk to different folks with First Nations, to get us at least some ideas, some direction, some pointers, So where we should be doing some deeper dive.
There's some really interesting experiences that some people have with Bigfoot, and it sounds like you're a very scientifically oriented group that really wants to measure things and be, very rational with your approach. But there are some people that just have some very unexplained happenings, like orbs and craft and Bigfoot appearing and disappearing. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have seen some orbs in the woods. I'm not gonna discount that. I've admitted to that before. I saw that stuff down in the Chestnut Ridge. I do run a paranormal podcast with a psychic medium, and mine is generally the guy to go out and debunk as much as we can. And then when we can't debunk that stuff, it goes into the file. So we have it to compare for later on. The quote unquote UFO Bigfoot sightings, well, there's a lot of other known animals in those areas. Why are we not saying squirrel? Why are we not saying cow? There's how many cow sightings near UFOs? And yes, we are getting more and more information on the UFO stuff. But again, till I see one coming out of a UFO or see one popping out of an orb, I mean, that's a whole other thing. I mean, it disappeared into a portal. Well, we know there's portals. That's scientifically proven. We know that there's, NASA's done some stuff on portals and some others. I mean, that's why when I say I go out and grab and this camera and us today is, using the paracord with the doing a circle search pattern from where you found that last track and getting to know the substrate and everything like that. If you're doing a documented search at pre-measured intervals, you're going to be able to cover a good amount of area instead of just taking that straight thing. So if you're doing that circle, you're finding things, you can really, and then taking that 3D scanner, you can really see that depth of impression to see if something's there. Is the double bear step. When we come to the talking about, stuff like, oh, it went behind a tree and then it disappeared. Well, sometimes that's an optical illusion as well. Here's 3 different sticks, 3 different sizes. And can you see those okay, Linda?
Yes.
From your side? Okay. So, these are all, different sizes. But if I take the little one here and I take the medium right here next to each other and I put that right in front, that distance, it's gone. So when folks say it was standing directly behind a tree because we lost it, it's probably whatever it is probably standing. I've done this with deer and other things. You're going to look for those prints, but I can still take this other piece, which is this one is almost an inch and a half, and still using that in the front. If it's in front of the thing, I'm coming right step back. You generally, that would be your shoulders right at this distance. So we're talking a foot. So again, some of those things where we say, oh, it disappeared. Well, let's go take a look at a distance from behind where that tree was or where that car or that stop sign. And again, it's a concealment thing, covering concealment, looking for items. And then again, starting from those points and doing those circle searches from either that known tree or that impression that we might find. So taking stuff in and out. And again, if it happens, you got to document it. You can't just say it didn't happen. Something happened while you're out there. Now, you're also going to want to really make sure you're documenting the weather conditions while you're going on. Putting things on like different flight radars or something like that to know what planes are overhead or helicopters, because are those lights you're seeing? Do you know where the local windmills or power towers at? I mean, we were out with a group, long night, we're all tired, and we're at the end of the night, and we can see something moving in a side of the tree. Well, at the same point, we see what we think is red eye shine coming from that area. And when we thermed with an older thermal camera, we got a heat return. Well, what we figured out after we got unpacked the night vision and everything else, that there was a, raccoon up in the tree, but just above the raccoon, there was a flashing light for a radio antenna, but it was flashing just ironically about the same time that raccoon was going. So again, it was that debunk. But for three of us standing there for a few minutes going, are we actually seeing eye shine? We definitely have a heat signature, but it just happened to be where those items were lined up. So again, knowing where that stuff is, getting out earlier in the day and documenting your area and getting to know what else is in the area sometimes can really debunk a lot of the stuff that's going on.
I think it's thorough, just more of a thorough investigation rather than jumping to conclusions.
Right, right. And again, then there's that point where you go, okay, what is that? I've been in places where you're hearing that like heavy equipment stuff going in, you're going, well, there's no heavy equipment working in this area, and that's where you're popping up the drone and you're looking to see if there's any construction, and it's 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, local, and it's raining, is the farmer out working and, putting some drainage in, or are you actually hearing, some kind of front end loader going in a canyon, which you wouldn't be able to get, that into. But again, you're you're putting that information down, what is the weather conditions, is it cold and crisp enough that you're hearing that sound move at a distance?
True. Have you found structures?
Uh, Again, the closest thing I'm going to say is like the kind of looking kind of nesty down in the Chautauqua County area. Have I found what looked like quote unquote tree structures? Yes, but those are areas the local Boy Scouts are using or the woodcrafters are using. I have friends that, that's what they do. They do bushcrafting, or they're folks that do Naked and Afraid, and, they're building those structures all the time. It's, a lot of times here I am up in the Northeast, we get little microbursts and snow and ice storms, so a lot of that stuff I kind of walk away from, because I'm not saying, hey, that's Mother Nature. I had wooded side lot, and I kind of just let and watched it for a year and watched the trees fall and how the branches came down and how they pile. You know, yeah, is there a location where you've got a whole bunch of maple or birch underneath the pine tree, and you're going, well, I can't explain that. Okay, so that goes into the documentation, but there's been a lot of places that I thought were great areas to go to, and we'd be at a convention and somebody would be like, hey, you really need to go check this area out. I went down here and I was doing knocks and screams and I'm getting stuff back, and you're like, well, let's see, we drove through that area. How many other folks are driving through those areas, especially if they've been featured on anything, that are doing the wood knocks or doing screams out in the woods? It's, you kind of got to say, okay, how many cars did you pass in and out of an area that are got Bigfoot stickers on, or some kind of paranormal research group? Because we saw it on TV, that's what folks are going out to do. So sometimes you got to take that and go, is it somebody that's out there doing the same thing we're doing, and we're beating on the same trees and screaming at the same thing? So I try not to even do the knocks or the screams anymore. I just go out and sit now, just listen.
Probably a good idea. So what else can you tell me? What else has your research, your knowledge, your contacts with people, your boots on the ground kind of activities? What can you tell me that we haven't discussed?
I guess the biggest thing is that, talking to folks, talking to even a nice young gentleman from UK the other day, and, is what are the benefits of going out and doing this? If you have a job or an experience, you can learn from the other folks around you. The health benefits of getting out and doing that hike, the camaraderie, the learning about your areas, learning how to read a map, outdoor skills, all the stuff that comes along with this is great. Now, I definitely will say I have talked to quite a few individuals that have seen something. And that's kind of what thing that keeps me going, is that the two or three people that really have gotten close, good friends that have seen something, that they can't explain, that kind of sets me out there going, what did they see? So that kind of drives me to get out there and try to document around the areas they're in and see what information is out there. And I guess that's my big thing of getting out there is if you're going to do this, document the best you can, and share with some friends. And there are no answers at this point. I don't know if you had your own experience, Linda.
No, no, I haven't.
Okay. So again, like I said, I've heard some stuff in the woods. I've kind of documented. And I've heard some screams that were gibbon like. But have we gone back to that area and got more of them at this time? No, not yet. So again, that was early in my research time. And did I have like the Merlin app run into, and again, I'm not seeing what's making that sound. Could have been a barred owl, could have been something else. But like I said, as a young, person doing a lot of volunteering in my youth, and having basically a chimpanzee, then an orangutan, then gibbons, then spider monkeys, and then a California sea lion behind me on the one side, and lions and tigers on the other side, and peacocks, and peafowl, and different birds. They make some really interesting sounds that we don't think about sometimes. You just think a bird's going to make that, that chirp or whatever, but hearing something deep and you're going to say, well, that's different. I need to put that into a documentation.
So if someone wanted to get more information about what you have to offer, give us that podcast again. And
so, yes, where's my sage on Instagram and Facebook? Tactical Bigfoot Research, Instagram and Facebook. I generally use Instagram more than I use Facebook. And, I generally, if asked, I'll pop onto a different podcast or do some small speaking engagements if they're, fundraiser kind of events or stuff, just to kind of help, especially if it's a youth orientated, to kind of get kids involved in science, I guess, and safety in the outdoors.